The morning heat at Naval Air Station Lemoore shimmered off the tarmac like a living thing, turning every surface into a mirror. Inside Hangar 6, the air smelled of jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, metal, and the kind of exhaustion that lived deep in the bones of every mechanic on base. Conversations bounced beneath the steel beams, clanking tools, shouted orders, the occasional bark of laughter. No one expected anything unusual to happen that Monday morning. Until Evan Hale walked in. He wasn't tall, wasn't flashy, wasn't loud. A plain gray t-shirt, faded jeans stained with work and time, and boots older than half the recruits in the hangar. But there was something about him, even if people couldn't name it right away. A steadiness. A way he moved with quiet precision, as if he'd spent years working next to screaming engines and had learned to conserve his energy like a survival skill. A few mechanics glanced up, didn't think much of him. New guy, one muttered. But Admiral Rayner noticed immediately. The Admiral wasn't a man who blended into anything. Broad-shouldered, silver hair cut with military sharpness, and a face that could intimidate a judge. He wore authority like it was sewn into his uniform, and he didn't smile, ever. People said he'd forgotten how sometime in 1989. That was why, when Rayner turned toward Evan with a slow, amused smirk, half the hangar froze mid-step. He pointed to the gutted FA-18 Hornet, sitting in Bay 3 like a fallen gladiator. "Fix this jet," Rayner drawled, loud enough for every mechanic to hear, "and I'll marry you." A few tools dropped, a wrench clattered, someone hissed under their breath, "Holy, did he just?" The joke wasn't just unexpected, it was unheard of. Evan blinked once, twice. Most people would have laughed or looked terrified. He did neither. He simply stared at the aircraft, studying every inch of its battered frame with a look that made the Admiral's smirk fade by an inch. This Hornet wasn't any ordinary maintenance case. It was the base's lost cause, written off as unfixable after a catastrophic systems failure. The flight computer was fried, the avionics were chaos, and even the landing gear sensors were dead. Teams had tried to resurrect it, some of the best, but eventually the jet became a warning story, a hunk of metal that reminded new recruits that not everything could be saved. Yet the moment Evan laid eyes on it, he didn't see a corpse. He saw familiarity. Rayner narrowed his eyes. "Well, Hale, you going to run like the others?" Evan stepped closer to the jet, touching a section of scorched metal near the intake. The hangar lights reflected in his gaze, dark, steady, unreadable. "What's the timeline?" Evan asked quietly. The Admiral lifted a brow. "Timeline, son, you're not actually considering." "I'm asking," Evan repeated. A few men snickered. One whispered, "He has no clue what he's getting into." But the Admiral had stopped smirking. Something in Evan's tone, calm, deliberate, triggered a flicker in his expression that almost looked like intrigue. "You want a timeline," Rayner said. "Fine, 30 days, no overtime pay, no extra hands, and that's me being generous." Evan nodded, still studying the jet, still not looking at the Admiral. "All right." Rayner blinked. "All right." "Yeah," Evan said, running his hand over the fuselage. "I'll do it." The hangar erupted, groans, laughs, bets being made on how long he'd last. Someone muttered, "Dude's insane." Another said, "The Admiral's gonna chew him up." Rayner stepped closer, voice low. "You understand I wasn't being serious with that marriage comment, right?" Evan finally looked at him. "Sure," he said with a small shrug, "but I am serious about fixing the plane." For reasons he couldn't explain, even to himself, Rayner felt the edges of a smile threatening again. He tamped it down quickly. "Your funeral," he said. But something about the exchange stuck in his mind. A civilian shouldn't have that kind of confidence around a crippled military jet. A brand new contractor shouldn't examine an FA-18 like he'd spent years inside its guts. And a single dad, hired only 3 weeks ago, shouldn't respond to an admiral's sarcasm with that much conviction. Rayner watched Evan drop his duffel bag beside the aircraft, roll up his sleeves, and open the first access panel like he already knew where every screw lived. Not guessing, not searching, knowing. That wasn't normal. "You got a background in aviation maintenance?" Rayner asked, arms crossed. Evan didn't look up. "Something like that." "That's not an answer." "That's what I've got." His tone wasn't disrespectful, just final, like he'd learned long ago how to shut a door gently but firmly. Rayner didn't like doors shutting on him, but for some reason he didn't push harder. Not yet. Instead, he stood there, watching Evan lean into the jet's interior, adjusting wires with the kind of care a man uses when handling something that once meant everything to him. The Admiral's jaw tightened. Who the hell was this man? Hours passed, mechanics came and went, lunch bells rang, sweat dripped. The base's daily rhythm pulsed around them. But Evan barely moved except to breathe. He worked with an obsessive stillness, unscrewing panels, tracing cables, humming quietly under his breath. A strange melody, soft, familiar. It floated through the hangar like a memory carried on airflow. Rayner eventually walked away, busy with command meetings, logistics, and a stack of files that never seemed to shrink. By late afternoon he returned. And Evan was still there. Sweat soaked his shirt. Electricity snapped as he rewired a circuit that hadn't seen power in half a decade. Small sparks danced across his gloves, lighting his face in sharp yellow flashes. He didn't flinch, didn't panic, didn't even curse. Rayner stepped beside him, watching again. The other mechanics watched the Admiral watching Evan. It was getting weird now. "You eat at all today?" Rayner asked. "No." "You planning to?" "Eventually." Rayner dropped a boxed sandwich next to him. Evan didn't look away from the jet. "Thanks," he murmured. Rayner's brow furrowed deeper. "Who works like this? Who concentrates this intensely? Who treats a forgotten aircraft like it was a living thing? And why did Evan look at the Hornet like it was a ghost resurrected?" Near dusk, as the sky painted itself orange and purple, Evan removed a charred panel under the cockpit. And froze. His breath hitched. His hand trembled, not from fatigue but recognition. There, etched faintly into the metal, was a symbol. A mark that shouldn't exist outside a very specific aircraft. A mark from a flight crew that was officially declared lost. A mark that said this jet wasn't assigned to him by accident. Someone wanted him to find it. He stepped back slowly, heart pounding. The jet wasn't a random job. The Admiral's smirk wasn't a joke. And the ghosts Evan had spent years outrunning had just found him again. He swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the fuselage until his knuckles turned white. No one in the hangar saw the panic flicker across his face. No one saw the truth slam into him. Except one man. Admiral Rayner, arms crossed behind him, watching from the shadows, his eyes sharp, unreadable, and far too knowing. And in that moment, Evan understood. This plane wasn't broken by accident. And neither was his life. The next morning, the sun rose over the base in streaks of amber and gold, but inside Hangar 6, the air felt colder. Evan arrived before anyone else, before the engines warming up on the flight line, before the officers' boots echoed down the corridors, before even the night shift clocked out. Only the hum of old ventilation units filled the silence. He stood in front of the Hornet like a man facing an old friend or an old wound. The symbol he discovered the night before wasn't much, just a faint engraving along the hidden side of the avionics bay, something most mechanics would miss. But Evan hadn't missed it. He couldn't. That marking belonged to his squadron, the one he'd been told was decommissioned after the accident, the one everyone pretended no longer existed. But the aircraft in front of him said otherwise. Someone had lied again. He reached into the panel, fingers brushing the metal. He could still hear it, Hear the crackling fire, the alarm screaming, the radio cutting out, the sudden plunge as the world went sideways. The sound of his own breath trapped inside a burning cockpit. The static, the silence. "Don't," he whispered to himself, shutting his eyes. "Not now." He forced the past away with a breath so heavy it almost brought him to his knees, then grabbed his tools and got back to work. The only way forward was through this aircraft. By 8 a.m., the hangar filled with life, boots scuffing, laughter echoing, engines roaring outside. Mechanics trickled in, mugs in hand, eyes still foggy with sleep. They noticed Evan immediately. He'd already removed 3 major assemblies and neatly organized every screw, cable, and component on labeled cloths across the floor. "Does he sleep?" someone whispered. "Man possessed," another muttered. A younger mechanic, Rodriguez, walked over, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Need a hand, Hale?" Evan didn't look up. "No." "You sure? That jet's a graveyard. Nobody blames you if you—" "I said I'm good." There was no bite in his voice, but something in his tone shut the conversation down fast. Rodriguez retreated. Evan wasn't being rude. He simply couldn't risk anyone getting close enough to see what he saw. The wires under the flight control system weren't routed according to any standard configuration. He'd seen this type of rerouting once, on classified test hardware never meant for operational aircraft. How did those modifications end up here? He found splices that weren't logged, connectors with still visible heat damage, and a hydromechanical unit stamped with a serial number that should have been destroyed after the crash. This wasn't a repair. This was a cover-up. And Evan was the only person besides the original investigators who could spot it. He kept his head down, worked faster. If someone planted this jet here for him, then someone else would eventually come to take him out of the equation. Around noon, sparks crackled violently as Evan attempted to bypass the damaged data bus. The flash lit his face in harsh yellow light, illuminating the shadows beneath his eyes. He didn't flinch, didn't curse, didn't even breathe for a moment. Another mechanic, Sanders, looked up from across the hangar. "Jesus, Hale, you trying to barbecue yourself?" Evan barely heard him. He just discovered something far worse than faulty wiring. The jet's flight computer wasn't just damaged. It had been tampered with. Someone had uploaded firmware that didn't match any Navy standard, something custom-built, half-corrupted, more advanced than anything a standard squadron would ever see. And yet familiar. Too familiar. Evan steadied his trembling hands. He knew this code. He'd helped design its precursor years ago under a test program that was quietly shut down after the crash. The project was classified so deep that half the admirals in the Pacific Fleet didn't know it existed. If the Hornet still contained remnants of that system, then Evan's crash hadn't been an accident. It had been a test. And he had been the test subject. His jaw clenched until pain shot into his temples. He grabbed a rag and wiped the sweat from his brow. His hand shook. He forced it still. Not now. Not here. It wasn't until 2 p.m. that Admiral Rayner appeared, silent as a shadow. His boots clicked sharply across the hangar floor before stopping behind Evan. "You've been here since dawn," Rayner said. "Aircraft needed work," Evan muttered, not looking back. Rayner studied him, studied the mess of components now neatly arranged on the ground, studied the precise dismantling that didn't look like a civilian's guesswork. "You ever going to tell me where you learned to do that?" Rayner asked. Evan kept working, trade school. Rayner snorted, "Yeah, and I'm the King of England." Evan's hand froze on a bundle of wires. Rayner didn't miss the hesitation. "You know," the Admiral continued, his tone dropping lower, "I checked your work records." Evan's stomach tightened. "Your references look fine, too fine," Raynor's eyes narrowed. Neat, clean, like someone scrubbed them. Evan swallowed hard. You saying I forged them? I'm saying they're manufactured. There's a difference. Evan finally turned, meeting the Admiral's gaze head-on. Raynor didn't look angry. He looked curious. Dangerously curious. What are you hiding, Hale? He asked quietly. And why do I get the feeling it's going to explode in my face? Evan forced his expression steady. I'm just here to work on the plane. Don't insult me, Raynor said. You touch that aircraft like you've lived inside it. Evan felt something sharp twist inside his chest. I've worked on jets before. Not like this, Raynor replied. Not with that look. What look? Raynor stepped closer, like you're trying to bring someone back from the dead. The words hit too close, landed too hard. Evan turned away. Let me work, he said. Raynor's jaw tightened, but after a long moment he stepped back. Fine, the Admiral said, but you're not the only one watching that jet. Evan stiffened. What does that mean? It means people are asking about you. Raynor's voice softened just a fraction. People who aren't from this base. A chill ran through Evan's spine. Raynor's gaze darkened. If there's something I need to know. There is. The Admiral's stare lingered on him for a long, searching moment. Then he turned and walked away. But his last words echoed through the hangar long after he left. You can lie to everyone else, Hale. Just don't lie to yourself. Evan exhaled shakily once the Admiral was gone. He looked back at the jet. The melted wiring, the corrupted system, the engraved symbol, the hidden test code. It all pointed to one sickening truth. This aircraft wasn't a challenge. It was a message. A warning. Or maybe a trap. Evan reached into the cockpit, touching the cold metal where flames once licked around him, where he'd almost died, where silence had swallowed him whole. His hand trembled. Why are you here? He whispered to the jet. But he knew the answer. Someone had resurrected it. For him. And whoever did wasn't done yet. Admiral Raynor didn't return to Hangar 6 the next morning with the intention of watching Evan Hale like a hawk. Admirals didn't hover. They inspected, demanded, reprimanded, and disappeared to deal with classified chaos. But that morning, Raynor found himself walking toward the hangar doors before he even realized where his feet were carrying him. He told himself it was routine oversight, nothing more. He knew that was a lie. The moment he stepped into the hangar, he saw Evan, already buried elbow-deep in the Hornet's open avionics bay, sleeves rolled up, hair tousled, every movement steady, deliberate, intimate. Too intimate. Raynor slowed, crossing his arms. There was something dangerous about a man who moved that quietly and that efficiently. Morning, Hale, he said. Evan glanced back briefly, nodded once, and returned to the wires. Not good morning, sir. Not hello. Just a nod. Raynor didn't like it, and somehow he didn't mind it either. Across the hangar, more mechanics filtered in. They spotted the Admiral and straightened instantly, posture snapping like someone had shoved steel rods down their backs. Raynor didn't look at them. His gaze stayed, locked on the man who didn't change his posture at all. Evan worked as if admirals wandered behind him every day. Finally, Raynor spoke again. You always start at dawn. No, Evan murmured. Raynor blinked, no. Evan slid a cable out of a housing and examined its burn marks. Today I started at 4. The Admiral stared. 4 a.m. Jet wasn't going to fix itself. Raynor's irritation flared, and then simmered into a strange blend of concern and curiosity. You do realize you're not active-duty military, right? Raynor said, tapping his boot against the concrete. You're not required to destroy your sleep schedule for this. I'm aware. Then why? Evan didn't answer immediately. He kept working, jaw tight, eyes slightly distant, like the question tugged at a memory he didn't dare touch. Rayner stepped closer. Hale. Evan finally looked at him. There was something in his eyes, fatigue, sure, but also a kind of haunted focus. A man driven by something deeper than repair work. "I don't like leaving things broken," Evan said simply. It wasn't the answer Rayner wanted, but it was the truth. Just before noon, Rayner returned again. This time he carried 2 boxed lunches. He didn't know why. He told himself it was because the mechanic union reps would have his head if a civilian passed out on federal property. He told himself it was because the base doctor had warned him that overworked staff were a liability. He told himself anything except the real reason. Rayner was worried. He set the lunch beside Evan's boot. "You're going to eat," Rayner said. Evan didn't look away from the open panel he was studying. "In a minute." "You said that yesterday." "Yeah." Rayner huffed a long breath. "Hale, look at me." Evan sighed and finally glanced up, sweat streaking down his temple. "You will eat," Rayner said, "and you will hydrate. This base runs on discipline. Don't make me put you on some kind of mechanic health watch." For the first time, Evan cracked a faint smile, just a flicker but real. "You going to write that into policy, sir?" he asked. Rayner's mouth twitched. "Don't test me. I can make weird orders stick." Evan opened the meal with a resigned exhale. "There we go," Rayner murmured, surprising himself with how relieved he felt. He started to walk away. Then he glanced over his shoulder and froze. Evan was eating with one hand, while the other continued to work inside the jet, releasing a connector lock with the same surgical precision he'd shown since day one. "Unbelievable," Rayner muttered. The man was fixing an FA-18 with one hand while eating with the other. Not even his best officers could multitask like that. By late afternoon, the hangar buzzed with speculation. Why's the Admiral hovering around that guy? He owes Rayner money or something. No, man, Rayner likes results, and Hale's the only one crazy enough to touch that death trap. Evan pretended not to hear any of it. Rayner pretended not to notice the rumors. Neither succeeded. At 1500 hours, Rayner finally confronted him. He walked beside Evan, arms folded behind his back, his voice dropping low enough that only Evan could hear. "You recalibrated that CDU from memory this morning." Evan's hands paused mid-repair. "Yeah." "No manual," Rayner stated. "No. No reference board." "No." Rayner's brow furrowed. The last guy who could do that retired in 2012. Evan swallowed hard. "Guess I learned fast." Rayner stepped even closer. "Hale, where did you serve?" Evan froze. The room seemed to tilt. Sweat that wasn't from heat slid down his spine. "I didn't," he said quietly. Rayner shook his head. "Don't lie to me, not about this. You worked flight systems before." "I worked on a lot of things." "You worked on this jet." Rayner pointed at the Hornet, voice rising. "Specifically this model, maybe even this exact aircraft." Evan turned to him sharply, eyes flashing. "Drop it, sir." Rayner's eyes narrowed. Why drop it?" "Because you don't want the answer." Rayner opened his mouth, then stopped. Something in Evan's voice, raw, hollow, pained, struck him harder than any classified report ever had. But Rayner wasn't a man who gave up easily. He reached into his uniform pocket, pulled out a single photograph, and held it out. Evan stared at it, unmoving. His own face was in the picture. Younger in uniform, standing beside the very same aircraft. His pulse hammered. He hadn't seen that photo since before the crash. Since before everything imploded. Since before his name vanished from Navy records like someone had deliberately erased him. Evan stared at the picture, jaw clenched hard enough to ache. "How did you get that?" he whispered. Rayner didn't flinch. "I have my ways." "That photo was sealed." "So was your test program," Rayner shot back. A muscle in Evan's jaw twitched. Silence stretched between them, heavy, suffocating. Finally, Rayner spoke softly, almost gently. "Hale, whatever you're running from, whatever happened in that cockpit." "Stop," Evan snapped, voice cracking. Rayner inhaled sharply. Evan pushed the photo back toward him, but his hand shook, not with anger. With fear. "Let me work," he whispered. "That's all I want, all I can do." Rayner stared at him, long, searching, calculating, worried, before slowly tucking the photo back into his pocket. He said nothing. Evan turned away first. But Rayner's voice stopped him just as he reached into the avionics bay. "I know your secret isn't small," Rayner murmured, "and I'm not done asking." Evan's grip tightened on the edge of the jet, knuckles bleaching white. He didn't turn. Didn't breathe. Didn't trust himself to speak. Because he knew with absolute certainty, that Rayner wasn't the only one asking questions now. And the next person who walked into that hangar might not be friendly. The next week at Naval Air Station, Lemore unfolded like a tightening vice around Evan Hale's life. Every day he arrived before sunrise. Every night he left long after the hangar lights dimmed. Every hour in between felt like walking across a floor lined with tripwires. And yet somehow, no one knew just how much danger he was really in. Not yet. On Monday morning, Evan stood in the shadow of the Hornet, tightening the last bolt on a repaired hydraulic manifold. Sweat dripped from his brow, his fingers cramped painfully, his eyes throbbed from hours of staring at wires so thin they resembled strands of hair. But the work grounded him. Work was the only place where his mind didn't spiral through the past, where he didn't see fire, didn't hear screaming metal, didn't relive the moment the ocean rushed up to swallow him whole. He could function here. As long as Rayner kept his distance. As long as no one asked questions. As long as no one looked too closely. But that morning, everyone looked too closely. He could feel eyes on him, security officers lingering near the hangar entrance, engineers glancing in his direction, officers whispering behind their tablets. Someone had stirred curiosity, or suspicion, or both. Evan didn't need to guess who. Admiral Rayner had put something into motion, even if unintentionally. At 10:15 a.m., Evan was neck-deep in the aircraft's electronics bay when he felt a presence behind him. An officer, tall, ramrod posture, clipboard in hand. "Contractor Hale," the officer said. "A moment." Evan slowly pulled himself out of the jet, lowered to the hangar floor, wiped his hands on a rag. "Yes, sir." The officer didn't smile. Routine inquiry. That phrase made Evan's stomach drop. "Regarding your background check." Evan's knuckles went white around the rag. "My background check was cleared months ago." The officer flipped a page. "Interesting thing about that, actually. The department handling your onboarding reports discrepancies." Evan's heartbeat thudded painfully. "What kind of discrepancies?" "Minor ones, I'm sure," the officer said with fake reassurance. "But legal requires clarity. We'll be in touch." He walked away. Evan exhaled shakily. Discrepancies. In a file that someone had deliberately scrubbed clean. He had known it was only a matter of time. At lunchtime, Rayner appeared again, always unexpected, always at the worst moment. His steps sharp, his expression sharper. He didn't bother with greetings. "Who spoke to you?" Rayner demanded. Evan didn't look away from the wiring harness in his hands. "Just a lieutenant." "What did he say?" "Routine inquiry." Rayner muttered a curse under his breath. something Evan had never heard from him. "Sir," Evan said, wiping sweat from his temple, "you digging into my past isn't helping." Rayner glared. "Your past is on my base, that makes it my business." "Then stop making it so loud. You're hiding something, Hale." Evan stood straight for the first time in hours, meeting Rayner's stare head-on. "And you're used to people breaking when you press them," he said quietly. "I won't." Rayner's expression faltered, just slightly. Evan went back to work. It was the safest position, the only position. But Rayner didn't leave. Instead, he stepped closer, voice rumbling low enough that only Evan heard it. "I'm not the person you need to be afraid of." Evan stiffened. "Then who am I supposed to be afraid of?" Rayner's gaze swept the hangar, through the shadows, the doors, the mezzanine, the unfamiliar boots standing at the exit. "Whoever else is watching you," Rayner said. Evan's heart punched hard against his ribs. "Because they're not doing it for fun." At 3 p.m., Evan received the call. He almost didn't answer because the number wasn't one he recognized, and unknown numbers rarely brought anything good. But he wiped his hands, stepped away from the jet, and pressed accept. "Hello." A tiny voice sniffled. "Daddy." Evan froze. "Lily, hey sweetheart, what's wrong?" She hiccuped. "A man came to daycare." The world narrowed to pinpoint. His pulse hammered violently. "What man?" Evan whispered. He asked the teacher questions," Lily stammered. "About you." His lungs seized. "Did he talk to you?" Evan asked, forcing his voice steady. "No," she whispered, "but he looked at me." Looked at her. Not a coincidence. Not a mistake. A message. "Where are you now?" Evan demanded. "With Miss Tessa," Lily said softly. "Is Miss Tessa there? Put her on, sweetheart." A shuffle, a breath. Then the daycare provider's voice came through, tense, nervous. "Mr. Hale, I'm so sorry. The man had credentials. He said he was confirming emergency contacts, I thought." "Was he military?" Evan cut in. She hesitated. "I think so." A cold blade slid into Evan's stomach. "I'm coming, now." He hung up and turned, only to find Admiral Rayner standing behind him. "You're leaving early?" Rayner asked, brow furrowed. Evan grabbed his bag. "My daughter, someone showed up asking questions." Rayner's expression shifted instantly, from irritation to fury. "Give me the description," he ordered. "No, I don't drag other people into my problems." Rayner grabbed his arm. "Hard, you already have." Evan pulled away. "She's my kid, I'll handle it." "You can't handle people who make children targets," Rayner snapped. "What do you know about it?" Evan spat. Rayner leaned in. His voice dropped into a dangerous, low growl. "Enough to know this wasn't random." Evan's jaw clenched. "I don't need your help." "You clearly do." I said no. The two men stared each other down, both equally stubborn, equally haunted. Rayner broke first, barely. "You run now," he warned, "and you're running blind." "I've been doing that for years," Evan muttered, brushing past him. Rayner didn't turn as he spoke. "They won't stop with questions." Evan froze at the doors. Rayner's voice carried across the hangar, quiet, grim, certain. "They'll come for you next." Evan left the base burning with adrenaline, sweat, and fear he refused to acknowledge. He raced through traffic, hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles blanched. At the daycare, Lily ran into his arms, burying her face in his neck. He held her tighter than he'd held anything in years. "Did he hurt you?" Evan whispered. She shook her head. "No." But she was shaking. And that alone made something dark, an ancient rise in him. Miss Tessa approached, apologizing over and over. Evan forced a calm smile, thanked her, carried Lily to the car and buckled her in. The moment the door shut, his expression hardened into something unforgiving. They were testing him. probing him, seeing how far they could push. He already knew they'd push further. He drove home, kept the doors locked, kept Lily close, fed her dinner, read her a book, tucked her in early. Only when she slept did he sit silently on the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. He couldn't outrun this forever. The crash he barely survived wasn't done with him. Someone buried the truth. Someone wanted him erased. Someone wanted him quiet. But someone else, someone with power, had assigned him that specific jet. Who? And why now? Evan lifted his head, eyes burning with exhaustion and something far more dangerous. Resolve. He whispered into the darkness. You want me back in the spotlight, fine, but you won't like what I drag out. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop digging. This is your only warning. Evan stared at the screen, then deleted the message. Because he knew the only way to protect Lily was to finish the jet, to find the truth buried inside it, to get ahead of whoever was hunting him. And that meant returning to the one man who kept pushing closer. Admiral Rayner. Tomorrow they would both cross a line. Whether they wanted to or not, Admiral Marcus Rayner arrived at the hangar before anyone else the next morning. The place was still dark, half the ceiling lights off, the massive bay door letting in a cold stretch of dawn. The FA-18 sat in the middle of the hangar like a silent threat, wrapped in shadows as if watching him back. Rayner hadn't slept. He hadn't even tried. He'd spent half the night replaying Evan Hale's face as the man rushed out the day before, fear flickering beneath anger, a kind of fear Rayner knew better than most. The last time he'd seen that expression was in the mirror, after he lost 2 pilots under his command. Fear for others. Fear you can't stop. Rayner ran a hand across his jaw, exhaling slowly before turning toward the open hangar door. He didn't have to look to know Evan was there. He could feel the tension before the man spoke. You're early, Evan said. You're late, Rayner countered without turning around. Evan stepped inside, Lily's backpack slung over one shoulder, meaning he'd already dropped her off. Good. She was safest around other adults. Rayner finally faced him. The man looked exhausted, eyes red, shoulders rigid, a quiet storm under the surface. You didn't need to come in today, Rayner said stiffly. You could have taken time. No, Evan said, walking past him toward the jet. Time makes things worse. That answer concerned Rayner more than anything. Evan grabbed a tool cart and pushed it under the jet's wing, sliding himself onto a creeper and rolling beneath the aircraft. As metal clinked above him, Rayner crouched down to speak to him eye to eye. I need the description of the man who went to your daughter's daycare. Evan didn't stop working. I told you stay out of it. Rayner's voice dropped. Children are not leverage. Evan's wrench slipped. He swore under his breath before meeting Rayner's eyes. You think I don't know that? He hissed. Rayner leaned closer. You owe me the truth. No, Evan snapped. I owe my daughter safety, and that means not putting more people between me and whoever's coming. You think you can fight shadows alone, Rayner shot back. You don't even know who's after you. I know enough. Rayner's jaw tightened, because he suspected the same thing that had been gnawing at him since the moment he first laid eyes on Evan Hale. Your crash wasn't an accident, Rayner said quietly. Evan froze. A slow breath escaped him. He slid out from under the jet, sitting up with his back against the wheel. He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. But the silence was confirmation enough. Rayner exhaled sharply. Then you're not just a man with a secret, he said. You're a man in the way of someone else. Evan stared at the floor. That's why I keep my head down. That's why someone's lifting it for you. Evan flinched, barely, but Rayner caught it. Because it was true. Someone was forcing him into the light. Rayner lowered himself, sitting on the floor opposite him. "Talk," the Admiral said, voice firm yet quieter than before. "Everything you say stays between us." But Evan shook his head. "I'm not dragging you into this." "You already did." "How?" Rayner pointed to the jet. "This aircraft, this assignment. The request came from an office I don't like, too high up, too vague." Evan's eyes slowly lifted. "Someone wanted you here," Rayner said. "Wanted you on this aircraft, and they wanted me watching you." That stunned Evan so much he forgot to breathe for a full second. "Why you?" he asked. Rayner shrugged once. "I have a reputation for loyalty, the kind that's useful if someone wants to make sure a problem stays contained." "You think I'm a problem?" Rayner held his gaze. "I think you're being framed as one." Evan swallowed hard. He looked away, jaw flexing, body tensing, as if trying to decide whether to keep a secret or let it out. Rayner didn't push. He simply waited. Good leaders did that. And after a long, aching silence, Evan spoke. "It happened over the Pacific," Evan began, voice low, steady in a way that came from trauma reheated over years. "Training, flight, everything normal until suddenly it was." He rubbed his hands together, as if trying to scrape off memories. "We weren't supposed to be in that airspace, not unless cleared, but the coordinates in our system, someone changed them." Rayner's brows drew together, mid-flight. "Before takeoff," Evan said, "and whoever did it knew exactly where we'd end up." Rayner waited. Evan continued. "We flew into a test zone, weapons testing, unauthorized, no one was supposed to be there." Rayner's breath stilled. "And then the jet failed," Evan said. "Not pilot error, not weather. A shutdown, clean, controlled, like someone pulled the plug." Rayner felt the hair on his arms rise. "You ejected." "Barely, my co-pilot didn't." Evan closed his eyes. Rayner didn't interrupt. After a long pause, Evan forced out, "The investigation was over in 3 days. Too fast, they said mechanical fault. But the report," his eyes hardened, "half the data was missing." "And you think someone erased it?" "I know someone did." Evan leaned forward. "And the day I started asking questions, my life began falling apart." Rayner inhaled slowly. "Which part do they blame you for?" "All of it," Evan said bitterly. "Pilot negligence, unauthorized entry, failure to react to malfunction." He shook his head. "Even though I wasn't flying, I was the engineer. I wasn't even in control of the plane." Rayner swore softly. Someone wanted a rapid scapegoat, and Evan fit neatly into the role. A contractor, a widower, a man without political connections. Easy to sacrifice. Rayner stood and paced the floor. "If someone orchestrated all that," he said, "they don't want a live witness." "I figured that out," Evan clipped. Rayner ran a hand over his face. "And now you're here, with a jet that shouldn't be on this base, assigned by people I don't trust, assigned to you." Evan's breath hitched. "You think this jet is connected?" he asked. Rayner pointed to the aircraft. "You tell me." Evan hesitated, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small, classified stamped component tag. Rayner frowned. "What is that?" "Something I found in the wiring harness yesterday," Evan said. "Someone replaced the original module. It wasn't logged, wasn't approved, wasn't safe." Rayner took the tag, inspecting it. "This doesn't belong to any system on this jet." "I know." The two men stared at each other, realization settling like ice in their veins. Someone had modified the aircraft. Someone wanted it back in the sky. Someone needed Evan to handle it. Rayner whispered, "They want you to sign your name to it." "Yeah," Evan said, "a signature of guilt." Rayner's expression darkened to something deadly serious. "No one touches that jet," he ordered. Not another bolt, not another wire. Evan blinked. But if I stop? You don't stop, Rayner said. You switch tasks. He tapped the jet. We're not fixing it anymore, we're exposing it. Evan stared. Rayner stepped closer, voice heavy with unmistakable truth. You're not a problem to contain. You're a witness someone wants buried. And you? Evan asked. Rayner's jaw tightened. I'm the one who's going to make sure they fail. But before either man could speak again, a voice echoed across the hangar. Admiral Rayner, hold position. Both men turned sharply. 2 military police officers entered, hands on their weapons, eyes locked on Evan. Rayner stepped forward in fury. What the hell is this? One officer lifted a folder. Admiral, we have orders. Rayner's stomach dropped. What orders? The officer swallowed. To take contractor Evan Hale into custody for questioning regarding sabotage. Evan's heartbeat stopped. Rayner's expression turned to stone. Someone had made their next move. And this time they weren't hiding. Evan Hale didn't move. Not because he was intimidated, not because he was guilty, but because he saw the look in the Admiral's eyes. And it told him everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a setup. Rayner stepped forward before the MP officers could get within 5 feet of Evan. Stand down, he barked, voice cracking like thunder. The MPs hesitated, but only for a second. Admiral, sir, the senior MP said carefully, we have written orders, direct from command. Contractor Hale is to be taken into custody for questioning regarding sabotage of Navy property. Rayner's nostrils flared, disbelief twisting into something darker. Sabotage, he repeated, incredulous. On what evidence? The MP swallowed. We're not cleared to discuss that with you, sir. Not cleared. Rayner stepped closer, towering over the 2 officers. You're in my hangar taking my crew without clearance to tell me why. The junior MP looked like he wanted to run. The senior one stiffened, almost defensive. Our orders come from a higher office, he said, holding Rayner's gaze. Above base authority. Above base authority. That phrase hit Rayner like a physical blow. There were only a handful of offices above base authority. And every single one of them had teeth. Behind Rayner, Evan let out a breath that trembled slightly. He'd known this moment would come. He just hadn't expected it to come so fast. Rayner turned back to him, voice low. Hale, don't say a word, not to them, not to anyone. Evan lifted his hands slowly, palms open, not in surrender but in caution. I didn't sabotage anything, he said, loud enough for the MPs to hear. I've been fixing what someone else tampered with. The MPs didn't react. They weren't here for truth. They were here because someone decided Evan was a threat that needed handling. And Rayner knew it. He stepped directly in the officer's path, jaw clenched. You're not putting cuffs on him. The hangar temperature seemed to drop. Sir, the senior MP warned, if you obstruct. Rayner didn't let him finish. You don't have probable cause, he growled. You don't have a warrant, you don't have chain of command notification, and the MP lifted a second folder. This came through 20 minutes ago. Rayner snatched it. Inside was a printed order, stamped with a level of clearance neither of them should have been able to see. Red lettering. High secret routing. Issued from an office Rayner instantly recognized and instantly hated. The seal belonged to the same department that authorized the mystery aircraft. Evan saw Rayner's expression harden as he read, and his stomach twisted into ice. What does it say? He asked. Rayner closed the folder slowly. It says, he said stiffly, that you're a potential risk to fleet assets and a person of interest in an ongoing classified investigation. Evan barked a humorless breath. That's one way to say they want me shut up. Rayner snapped the folder shut with enough force to echo through the hangar. He glared at the MPs. "This is garbage," he hissed. "Who signed this?" The MP tapped the bottom section. "Acting Deputy Director Cole, sir." Rayner's entire body stiffened. Cole? He hadn't heard that name in years. Not since an internal deployment that went disastrously sideways. Not since Cole pulled strings and left 3 pilots holding the blame. The same man who manufactured scapegoats. The same man who buried evidence. The same man who played chess with people like they were disposable pieces. Rayner lowered the folder. And in that moment, Evan understood. This wasn't about the jet. This wasn't about a faulty report. This wasn't even about the Pacific crash anymore. This was about someone powerful finishing a job. The MP stepped forward again, this time more cautiously. "Mr. Hale," the senior one said, "you need to come with us." Evan stood slowly, not resisting but not accepting either. "If I go with you," he said quietly, "will I come back?" Neither MP answered. Which was answer enough. Rayner stepped between them again. "He's not leaving my supervision," he said. "He comes with me, not to some locked room where he conveniently disappears." "Sir," the MP began, "you're not authorized to." "I outrank the person who signed this order," Rayner snapped. "Unless you want to explain to command why you ignored an admiral on his own base, you'll stand down until I confirm this order's legitimacy." The MPs exchanged a look. A long one. Then the senior MP exhaled sharply. "10 minutes, sir," he said. "We'll wait 10 minutes, but if we don't get counterorders." His hand hovered over his cuffs. Rayner nodded once. "Give me 15. The MP shook his head. 10. Rayner didn't argue. He grabbed Evan by the arm, not aggressively, but with urgency, and marched him across the hangar toward his office. Only when the door shut behind them did Rayner allow the fury in his chest to flare. "Sabotage charges," Rayner muttered. "They're not even trying to make it subtle." Evan sat heavily on the chair opposite the Admiral's desk. "They're scared," he said. "That means they know I found something." Rayner leaned over the desk, hands braced against it. "What exactly did you find?" he demanded. "And I want the truth, Hale, all of it." Evan rubbed his temples. "I already told you there was a component that shouldn't exist, something new, something off books. Someone installed it during transport or storage." Rayner shook his head. That alone wouldn't trigger this response. Evan hesitated. Rayner noticed instantly, "There's more." Evan looked at the floor. "I found a secondary module deeper in the avionics bay," he admitted. "It was disguised as a backup cable housing, but the wiring configuration," his voice tensed, "it looked similar to the override system that triggered my crash." Rayner froze. Every muscle in his body locked. "You're telling me," Rayner said slowly, "that the same kind of sabotage that took down your jet is inside this one?" "Not confirmed," Evan said, "but it matches, and whoever put it there didn't expect a mechanic to find it." Rayner paced, a short, violent stride. "Cole," he muttered, "that bastard, he wants it flown. He wants it logged as a clean test flight once it crashes." "The pilot gets blamed," Evan said. "And you?" Rayner asked. Evan's smile was bitter. "I get labeled a saboteur who tried sabotaging twice." Rayner stopped packing. Then he said the most dangerous words an admiral could say. "I'm pulling rank." Evan's head snapped up. "Don't take that risk." Rayner shook his head. "You are under my command, my supervision, my base," he said. "They want you gone before you can speak. That tells me everything I need to know." Evan stood slowly. "Rayner," he said, voice low, "they'll come after you too." Rayner stepped closer, so close Evan could see the fire in his eyes. Let them. Evan didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified. Because Rayner wasn't reckless. He wasn't emotional. He wasn't the kind of officer who endangered his career. But for some reason Evan didn't yet understand, Rayner had crossed a line for him. And once crossed, there was no going back. The office phone rang. Both men turned. Rayner answered. Yes. A beat. Then his face drained of color. What? He whispered. Evan felt his pulse spike. Rayner hung up slowly. He turned toward Evan, and the world seemed to tilt. That was the daycare, Rayner said. Evan felt the floor disappear beneath him. What happened? He demanded. Rayner swallowed. They said a man came asking for Lily again. Evan's blood ran cold. Rayner continued, voice like gravel. They took her out of the building. She's gone. The room spun. The MP's outside. Cole's orders. The sabotage. The threats. The fear. Everything collided into a single, horrifying truth. Lily wasn't a warning anymore. She was leverage. And now, Evan had nothing left to lose. For several seconds, Evan couldn't breathe. Not in the dramatic sense, not metaphorically. His lungs actually froze. Lily. Gone. The words slammed into him like a missile, tearing through every protective layer he'd built over the last 3 years. He didn't hear Rayner calling his name. Didn't feel the chair topple over behind him. Didn't notice the pen holder he'd knocked off the Admiral's desk, scattering metal clips across the floor like shrapnel. All he heard were Lily's last words from the day before. He looked at me. Evan's hands shook violently. Not from fear. From rage so sharp it could cut steel. Rayner grabbed Evan's shoulders, forcing him to lock eyes. Listen to me, Rayner said firmly, voice steady even though his jaw was clenched tight. We are going to get her back. Evan's stare was hollow and wild at the same time. If they hurt her. They won't, Rayner said, because they didn't take her to hurt her. Evan laughed short, bitter, cracked. You don't take a kid to send flowers, Rayner. Rayner tightened his grip. They took her to control you. That means she stays valuable alive. The word alive punched through Evan like a defibrillator. He straightened sharply, his face hardened, his breathing steadied but only enough to function. His entire body was vibrating with a terrifying, focused energy. They took her, Evan repeated, voice low, cold, utterly stripped of panic. So I'm going to take them apart. Rayner nodded once. Good, then we begin now. He turned toward the door. But Evan stepped in front of him, so abruptly Rayner had to stop. No cops, Evan said quietly. I know. No military police. I know. No official channels of any kind. Rayner's eyes darkened with grim agreement. Official channels are the ones that took her. Evan swallowed hard. Then he whispered, Why her, Rayner? Why my daughter? Rayner didn't answer at first. Because the truth was too heavy to speak. Finally he said, Because you weren't moving fast enough. Because you weren't scared enough. Because someone wanted to force your hand. And they think I'll trade my obedience for her safety, Evan said. Rayner stepped closer. Will you? Evan stared at him with a look so raw, so brutally honest. Rayner felt his own breath hitch. I will burn this entire base to the ground, Evan whispered, before I let them use my daughter as a bargaining chip. Rayner nodded. Then we need to be smarter than they expect. They stepped out of the office. The MPs waiting for Evan immediately straightened. Time up, Admiral, the senior MP said. Rayner didn't slow down. New orders, Rayner barked. Contractor Hale is authorized to remain on base under my direct supervision. The MP frowned. From who, sir? From me, Rayner said sharply. You want to question it? Call command and ask if they want an admiral obstructed on his own base during an active investigation. Both MPs froze. They weren't stupid. 2 years ago, an MP who challenged an admiral ended up scrubbing duty for 6 months and reassigned to a remote island. They stepped back. Evan didn't look at them, didn't even blink as he walked past. He was already somewhere else. Already thinking like a man hunting ghosts. Inside the hangar, Rayner moved quickly. He grabbed a secure tablet, unlocked a classified console, and pulled up surveillance feeds. Evan leaned over his shoulder. Does the daycare have cameras? Rayner asked. Yes, Evan said. 3 inside, 2 outside. Rayner hammered commands into the console. Then we're pulling them. A second later, the feed loaded. Static first. Then a clear image of the daycare entrance. And then, a man. Tall. Base cap pulled low. Civilian clothes. Gloved hands. Military posture. He spoke to the receptionist. Showed something, credentials probably. Then pointed toward the hall that led to Lily's classroom. Evan's jaw tightened to the point Rayner feared he might break a molar. Then the man reappeared, holding Lily's hand. She didn't look scared, but she looked confused. Her little backpack bounced as she walked beside him. He lifted her into a black SUV with tinted windows. The vehicle drove off. Evan's breath trembled. Rayner paused the footage. Print it, Evan said quietly. Rayner tapped the screen. Also pull plate recognition from the exit gate, Evan added. Already running it. Seconds passed. Rayner cursed. What? Evan demanded. The plate is fake registration, fake model trace. Evan leaned on the table, head down. Rayner watched him carefully. Most men would be broken by now. Evan wasn't breaking. He was sharpening. We follow the vehicle, Evan said. There are traffic cams outside the base. You won't get access to them without. You, Evan finished. You're the admiral, pull whatever you need. Rayner hesitated. Not because he disagreed, but because he saw something in Evan's eyes that he'd only seen in combat pilots seconds before they chose a dangerous maneuver. A willingness to die for the outcome. Rayner stepped closer. Evan, look at me. Evan lifted his eyes. And Rayner spoke with a rare softness. We will get her back, he said, but not by dying for it, not by letting them predict your next move. Evan's fists tightened. Tell me what you need from me. Rayner answered without hesitation. The truth. Evan blinked. Then Rayner asked the question he'd been holding since the moment Evan's file crossed his desk. Who, Rayner said quietly, do you think is behind all of this? Not the foot soldiers, not the cleanup crew, the man at the center. Evan looked at the paused footage of Lily being carried away. His lips parted. A shaky breath escaped. Then, for the first time, he spoke the name he'd never said out loud to another soul. Cole. Rayner stiffened. Cole, Evan repeated. He oversaw the Pacific Test Zone. He signed off on the altered coordinates. He certified the maintenance logs that disappeared. He closed the investigation. His voice hardened. And now he wants what's in that jet. Rayner felt a chill crawl down his spine. He won't risk exposure, Evan continued, so he needed leverage. Rayner swallowed. But why Lily? Why not take you directly? Because I'm difficult to control, Evan said bitterly. Because death threats don't work on men who have already crawled out of them. Rayner nodded slowly. And because Lily is small, Evan added softly. Because she's quiet, because they thought she'd be easy. Then Evan lifted his head. And Rayner saw something that made his own pulse stutter. A terrifying, icy clarity. They made a mistake, Evan whispered, because taking her doesn't make me obedient. He stepped toward the hangar door. It makes me unstoppable. Raynor followed. We'll need transport, Raynor said, unmarked. I can get a vehicle unnoticed, Evan said. And a safe place to plan. I know one. Raynor looked at him. Hail. Evan paused. Raynor's voice dropped to a gravel-low promise. I'm with you. Evan closed his eyes for a moment, barely, briefly. Not relief. Not comfort. Recognition. Because in that moment, they weren't an admiral and a contractor. They were two men cornered by the same ghost. Evan exhaled, opened his eyes again. And all softness disappeared. We leave now, he said, before the next hour turns into something we can't undo. Raynor grabbed his jacket, holstered a secured comm device, and followed Evan out. The base continued its normal operations around them. Engines roaring, pilots jogging, mechanics laughing, officers shouting orders. Unaware that a line had been crossed in the shadows. Unaware that one little girl had become the match that could burn through the Navy's secrets. Unaware that two men, one father, one admiral, were about to go hunting. Not for a child, but for the truth. And the truth. It was going to scream. The storm had broken hours ago, but inside Hangar 4 the air still felt electrically charged. The kind of heaviness that lingers after lightning barely misses something precious. The crews were gone, the alarms off, the shadows long across the concrete floor. Only two people remained in the cavernous space, Jake and Admiral Sinclair. The jet sleek, repaired, whole again, gleamed under the fluorescent lights like a living thing finally able to breathe. Everything around it felt muted, as if the hangar itself was waiting to see what happened next. Jake stood with his hands in his pockets, shoulders squared but breath unsteady. He wasn't nervous about the Admiral's reaction to the repair. He wasn't even nervous about what came after. He was nervous because for the first time in years, someone had forced him to confront the truth he kept shoving into the back of his mind. He mattered. His work mattered. His story mattered. And his future, his daughter's future, didn't have to be built on sacrifice alone. But facing the Admiral now, that was another matter. Admiral Sinclair approached the jet, running her hand along its nose like she was greeting an old friend who'd come back from war. Her expression was unreadable. She circled it slowly, observing, testing, inspecting every seam, every bolt. Jake stayed quiet, letting her work. He'd always respected her intensity. But now, after everything that had come out, the stories, the secrets, the reveal about Nora, he saw her differently. Not as an untouchable commander, but as a woman carrying her own ghosts. After a full 5 minutes of silence, she finally stepped away. It's flawless, she said softly. Jake nodded. I double-checked the wiring harness. The thermal limits too. Hydraulics are clean, she's good for flight. The Admiral turned toward him. You didn't just fix it, you restored it. Jake hesitated, then shrugged lightly. It deserved better than to sit broken. She inhaled deeply, eyes sharp and searching. Jake, why didn't you tell me sooner, about Nora, about everything? There it was, the question he'd been expecting, the confession he'd been dreading. Jake rubbed the back of his neck. Because I knew you saw me a certain way. The single dad who works quiet, keeps his head down, does the impossible when someone needs it. And I didn't want to change that. I didn't want pity. I didn't want a faster promotion because someone felt sorry for me. I wanted to earn every inch of ground. The Admiral stepped closer, her voice low. You did. Jake, you earned more than anyone could imagine. He gave a half smile. Maybe. But the second I told you I was raising my daughter alone, things would change. People treat you different when they know you're doing this alone. They assume you're fragile. They assume you can't give all of yourself to the job. You can, she whispered. I do, every day, but I also give everything to her. The Admiral swallowed hard. I understand more than you think. Jake met her eyes. I know now, but I didn't before. A quiet stretch of air hung between them. Finally, the Admiral exhaled and looked away, her expression tightening. When I said that ridiculous line, "Fix this jet and I'll marry you," it was stupid. Jake laughed lightly. No, it was very sharp, intense, half joking but also not. Her cheeks warmed almost imperceptibly. I didn't think you'd take it seriously. I didn't, Jake said sincerely. Then softer, not at first. She looked up sharply, but now. Now. That word carried a weight Jake never expected, because something had shifted, subtly, undeniably, over the last 48 hours. He had seen her cracks, her humanity, her loyalty, and she had seen his. And for the first time since Nora died, someone wasn't seeing him as broken or struggling or fragile, just capable, responsible, deeply devoted to the people he loved. He stepped closer, stopping just a few feet from her. "Admiral, you scare me," Jake admitted quietly. Her eyebrows lifted. "I do." Jake nodded. "Because you're one of the strongest people I've ever met, and because when you joked about marriage, a part of me realized how long it's been since anyone even thought about my life outside of fixing jets and raising Emma." The Admiral's face softened. "Jake, I'm not ready for something huge. I'm not ready for promises, and I'm definitely not ready for marriage," he said with an honest half-smile. "But I'm ready to stop acting like I'm invisible." The Admiral's breath caught, not in disappointment but in relief. Genuine, uncluttered relief. "Good," she said, stepping closer until they were only inches apart. "Because I wasn't proposing. I was trying to push you. I wanted to see if you still had fight in you." Jake smirked. "I had a lot more than you expected." "No," she said, "exactly as much as I expected." Their eyes met, steady, equal, unguarded. "So what happens now?" she asked. Jake thought of Emma, asleep 3 miles away in the base housing. He thought of the jet behind them, humming with potential. He thought of Nora, of the last promise he made to her, to keep going, even when it hurt. "We don't make it complicated," Jake replied. "You go back to commanding the skis. I go back to fixing the birds that keep them safe. And maybe we talk more, you and me, honestly, not as admiral and chief mechanic, just people." Her lips curved into something he'd never seen on her before, something real, something hopeful. "I can do that," she whispered. "And maybe one day," Jake added, "when Emma meets you, she won't be scared of the Admiral who can freeze a room with her eyes." The Admiral laughed, a genuine, warm sound that echoed beautifully in the empty hangar. "I'll try to tone down the freezing." Jake nodded. "And I'll try not to break any more fighter jets." "You didn't break it," she said. "You saved it." They stood in the quiet, the jet gleaming beside them like a symbol of everything broken finally put back together. Then the Admiral extended her hand, not for protocol, not for rank, but simply as a person offering trust. Jake took it without hesitation. A long moment passed between them, calm, warm, steady. And then, exactly as the hangar lights dimmed into night, she said softly, "For the record, Jake, if I ever did propose, you'd know I meant it." Jake's smile grew slowly, deeply. "Then I'll fix every jet on this base," he said, "just in case." The Admiral's eyes shone with something that wasn't command, wasn't distance, wasn't strategy. Something like possibility. And as they stood side by side in the quiet heart of the hangar, the last echo of the storm fading behind them, it was clear. Some stories don't end with a kiss. Some don't end with a proposal. Some don't end with grand gestures or dramatic confessions. Some stories end exactly the way real life does. With two people finally seeing each other clearly. And choosing, simply quietly, to keep going forward. Together,